On May 2nd, 1968, Staff Sergeant Roy Benavidez jumped from a hovering helicopter into a jungle controlled by hundreds of enemy soldiers. He had no rifle. He carried a medical bag, a knife, and the determination to rescue a trapped reconnaissance team. 6 hours later, he had suffered 37 separate wounds. He had been shot, struck by grenade fragments, clubbed in the face, and stabbed with a bayonet. He was eventually mistaken for dead and placed inside a body bag. But Roy Benavidez was still alive. His full name was Raul Perez Benavidez, although almost everyone knew him as Roy. He was born on August 5th, 1935, near Cuero, Texas. His parents worked as sharecroppers and migrant farm workers. Both died from tuberculosis before Roy was 8 years old. Roy and his younger brother were then raised by relatives in El Campo, Texas, alongside several cousins. He left school as a teenager and worked in fields to help support the family. In 1952, at 17 years old, Roy joined the Texas Army National Guard. 3 years later, he entered the active duty United States Army. He trained as an infantryman before serving in South Korea and Germany. He later completed military police training and joined the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Roy completed airborne training and became a skilled paratrooper. He wanted to push himself further and eventually set his sights on joining the Army's Special Forces. In 1965, Roy was sent to Vietnam as an advisor to South Vietnamese troops. During a patrol, he stepped on a land mine. The explosion severely damaged his spine and left him paralyzed from the waist down. Roy later remembered waking up at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines with no memory of how he had arrived there. He was transported back to the United States and treated at Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. But the doctors told him the damage was so severe that he might never walk again. The Army began preparing to medically discharge him. Roy refused to accept that outcome. At night, when medical staff were absent, he pulled himself out of bed and crawled towards a wall. Using his elbows and chin, he forced his body upright and tried to place weight on his legs. Other wounded soldiers in the hospital encouraged him and watched for approaching staff. Roy later admitted that the pain frequently left him in tears. He slowly progressed from sitting to standing, then from standing to taking small steps while holding the wall. When doctors arrived with his final discharge paperwork, Roy climbed out of bed and walked across the room. Instead of being discharged, he entered an intense rehabilitation program. Within months, he went from barely walking to running long distances while carrying a military rucksack. Roy returned to Fort Bragg and completed Special Forces selection in 1967. He trained as a weapons specialist and earned his place in the 5th Special Forces Group. In January 1968, Roy returned to Vietnam as a staff sergeant. He joined Detachment B-56, a highly secretive unit conducting dangerous intelligence missions beyond conventional battle lines. On the morning of May 2nd, 1968, Roy was returning from a Catholic church service when he heard desperate radio messages at the forward base near Loc Ninh. A 12-man reconnaissance team had been inserted into dense jungle west of Loc Ninh across the Cambodian border. The team consisted of 3 American Special Forces soldiers and 9 Vietnamese Montagnard fighters. Their mission was to gather intelligence about a major North Vietnamese military presence. Shortly after landing, they were surrounded by a force many times larger than their own. Every member of the reconnaissance team was either dead or wounded. 3 helicopters had already attempted to extract them, but were forced away by intense ground and anti-aircraft fire. One of the trapped soldiers was Roy's friend, Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright. Only weeks earlier, Wright had helped save Roy during another dangerous patrol. Roy watched the damaged rescue helicopters return to the base carrying wounded crew members. He immediately grabbed an aid bag and climbed onto the next aircraft, preparing to make another attempt. Nobody ordered him to go. He volunteered. The helicopter reached the area but could not land because of the heavy fire and dense jungle. Roy instructed the pilot to hover above a nearby clearing. He then jumped approximately 10 feet from the aircraft into the jungle below. Roy began running around 75 meters towards the trapped team. Enemy fire tore through the trees around him. Before reaching the team, Roy was shot in his right leg. A grenade explosion also sent fragments into his face and head. Roy continued moving. When he reached the survivors, he found 4 men dead and the others badly wounded. Several could no longer fight or move without assistance. Roy took control of the situation. He treated the wounded, distributed ammunition, and reorganized the remaining men into a defensive position. He recovered a rifle from one of the fallen fighters and began returning fire. He then used smoke canisters to guide another rescue helicopter towards the team. When the aircraft arrived, Roy carried and dragged wounded men towards it. He repeatedly crossed exposed ground while bullets struck the trees and earth around him. He then ran beside the moving helicopter, providing protective fire as it attempted to reach the remaining survivors. Roy realized that the dead team leader was carrying classified documents. If those documents were captured, they could expose secret operations and endanger other soldiers. He ran back to recover them. As Roy reached the team leader's body, he was shot in the abdomen. Another grenade exploded, driving fragments into his back. At almost the same moment, the rescue helicopter's pilot was fatally wounded. The aircraft crashed and overturned before it could escape. The rescue attempt had failed. Roy was now severely wounded, and the survivors were trapped beside the wreckage. He secured the classified documents and crawled back towards the crashed helicopter. He then pulled wounded crew members from the overturned aircraft and organized everyone into a defensive perimeter. Enemy soldiers continued closing in. Roy moved around the position, distributing water and ammunition. He treated injuries and repeatedly encouraged the survivors to keep fighting. He then used a radio to call in airstrikes and directed supporting helicopter gunships towards enemy positions. The air support held the attackers back long enough for another extraction attempt to begin. The battle continued for hours. While treating another wounded soldier, Roy was shot again, this time in the thigh. He still refused to leave anyone behind. When another helicopter finally landed, Roy began carrying the injured towards it one at a time. During one journey, an enemy soldier approached from behind and struck Roy in the head with a rifle. The blow dislocated his jaw. The soldier then stabbed Roy with a bayonet, causing additional wounds to his arms and body. Roy fought back and killed the attacker with his knife. He continued carrying men towards the helicopter. As Roy reached the aircraft, he noticed two enemy soldiers approaching from an angle that the helicopter's door gunner could not see. Roy stopped them before they could attack the crew. He then returned to the perimeter again. Roy checked that every surviving soldier had been evacuated. He also gathered or destroyed the remaining classified documents, so nothing sensitive could be recovered by the enemy. Only after everyone else had been removed did Roy allow himself to be pulled onto the helicopter. He was the final man to leave the battlefield. The aircraft had been heavily damaged and many of its instruments no longer worked. The pilot managed to lift above the jungle and return towards the forward base. Roy lost consciousness almost immediately. The battle had lasted approximately 6 hours. His actions were credited with saving the lives of at least 8 men. Back at the base, Roy was placed on the ground beside the dead, recovered from the battlefield. His eyes were sealed shut with blood, his jaw was dislocated, and he could not speak or move. A doctor examined him and pronounced him dead. Roy felt himself being placed inside a body bag. He heard the zipper beginning to close but could not call out or open his eyes. Another soldier recognized him and demanded that the doctor check again. The doctor placed a hand against Roy's chest. Using the last strength he had, Roy spat blood into the doctor's face. It was enough. The body bag was opened and Roy was rushed into emergency surgery. He spent more than a year recovering in military hospitals. Doctors documented dozens of wounds caused by bullets, grenade fragments, the rifle strike, and the bayonet attack. Roy was initially awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration for bravery. Officials believed there was no surviving eyewitness who could provide the evidence required for the Medal of Honor. Roy continued serving and eventually reached the rank of Master Sergeant. He retired from the Army in 1976 after more than 20 years of service. Years later, a surviving member of the reconnaissance team provided a detailed eyewitness account of Roy's actions. The new evidence allowed his award to be reconsidered. On February 24th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented Roy Benavidez with the Medal of Honor during a ceremony at the Pentagon. Before reading the citation, Reagan told the audience that Roy's story was so extraordinary that they would not believe it if it were presented as a movie script. Roy never described himself as a hero. He insisted that the real heroes were the soldiers who never returned home. After retirement, he lived in El Campo with his wife, Ilaria, and their 3 children. He completed his education and dedicated much of his later life to speaking at schools, military bases, and youth organizations. Roy encouraged young people to remain in education and create better opportunities for themselves. He also campaigned to protect disability benefits for military veterans. Roy Benavidez died on November 29th, 1998, at the age of 63. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio, Texas. Military buildings, schools, roads, and a United States Navy transport ship have since been named in his honor. Roy had once been told he would never walk again. He walked. He was told his military career was over. He returned to service. He jumped into a battle that others could not reach. He was shot, stabbed, blinded by blood, and mistaken for dead. But he continued until the wounded were safe, until the documents were secured, until he was the last man left. Roy Benavidez did not enter that jungle because he believed he could survive. He entered it because his friends could not survive without him. This has been Comic Book Cases. Thanks for joining us on today's deep dive into Roy Benavidez. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Comment below what you thought of Roy. Stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next one.